We good to go, Brian? All right. Today's passage takes place, just to kind of like remind you of some of the historical context. I'm gonna use the year, if you're taking notes, I'm gonna use the year, it begins in the year 480, and it's gonna kind of span a year's time. And just to, without giving you, it's like 100 years after Jerusalem was initially destroyed. The people have been taken off into exile. At this point, a lot of people have returned. A lot of Jews have returned back and rebuilt the temple. But Esther and Mordecai, they continue living in exile. And there's a lot of Jews who continue living in exile at this point in time. But Esther has been allowed to return back. I mean, her people have been allowed to return back to Jerusalem. But for whatever reason, and we don't know what the reason is, but for whatever reason, Esther and Mordecai, who, I guess, what are we saying, like cousin, but kind of more like an uncle, more like a father figure. If I say uncle at any point, it's because it's like, technically they're, if I remember, they're cousins, but it's more like it doesn't feel like an even level of, like how I might look at some of my, when I was a kid, I had a closer relationship with my cousins. It's not like that type of a thing. Definitely more like an adoption type of a situation. But for whatever reason, they've chosen to live their lives in exile. Meanwhile, the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, is going through some tumultuous times where, they had been preparing for war against Greece. He wanted to invade Athens, and then his queen rebels against him, and he ends up going to war. He ends up losing the battle. It's a humiliating loss. This part of it we know from history. We don't know necessarily from the Bible, but it's a humiliating loss. And now he's distracting himself with a search for new women, and he gathers up the most beautiful women in all of Persia, and they all enter into his harem. And one by one, and I hate to use the terminology, but this is what he does. One by one, he beds these women. And I mean, that's what kind of a harem is for in the ancient world, unfortunately. And so the king drowns himself in a life of sexual debauchery, is the best way of putting it. And all the while, he's looking for his queen. And I think I said at some point last week, it's Ahasuerus' world. Everyone else in Susa is just living in it. And Esther is just living in it. But, she uses her attributes, which Scripture says that she's beautiful of face and form. That is, she has a beautiful face and she has a beautiful body. And she's preparing to become part of the royal harem. Now, from my perspective, I made this known last week. I'm going to make this known many times throughout the book of Esther. Maybe 9 or 10 more weeks in Esther. These guys are compromisers. And from my perspective, these guys are compromisers. And we have hints of that all over the place. I have to think they know it's wrong to marry an unbeliever. I have to think they know that. I have to think that Jewish history up to this point has shown them. I have to think that they have some knowledge of the law of Moses that would show them this. So I have to think they know it's wrong. I have to think that there's the possibility, at some level, there's at least the possibility of escaping the situation instead of entering into the harem. I have to think that. I have to think at some level they could be telling the people around them about their heritage and about their faith, which at this point we've seen they're not doing. They're hiding it. So, I have to think a godly woman would be upset about the situation, would maybe object to it and face the consequences of it. We've seen that type of thing. Like, for instance, you could look at the book of Daniel and see how people would refuse to do what the secular world was asking them to do, and then would face the consequences, like Daniel's 3 friends who were cast into the fiery furnace, or Daniel who was cast into the lion's den because they wouldn't follow the commands of the worldly culture and the sinful culture. So when you're looking at, and they're not exactly far off when it comes to time. Daniel's thrown into the lion's den maybe in the 530s or something like that, in the 540s. Like it's we're only 50 years away. 50 years earlier is the Lion's Den incident. So, here these people, they do nothing. They seem to be content with the situation. They seem, in my mind, I see them as opportunists. This is an opportunity to get out of the life of a poor exile and into the life of luxury and royalty and influence. I can't read it any other way. Now, maybe you read it differently. Maybe you read it like Esther is the epitome of a godly woman. I would say, I don't know, give me some evidence of that. Give me some evidence, because all the evidence that I'm looking at seems to indicate otherwise. Because all of our actions seem to go against what the godly people in Scripture have done and what God says. So I can't see her as a godly woman. I can't see her that way. Not yet, at least. One of the biggest hints that Esther and Mordecai are not living in godliness is, for me, the fact that they're hiding their lineage and therefore hiding their faith. That's a big one for me. So anyway, we pick up in Esther chapter 2 with Esther preparing for an entire year. That's why I say we start around 480, then we move to around 479 in the passage. But she prepares for an entire year to meet the king in the royal bedroom. Now, when the turn of each young lady came to go into King Ahasuerus, and that means into his bedroom, to be with him. After the end of her 12 months under the regulations for the women, for the days of their beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. And we'll stop right there just for a second. So Esther's body is prepared to meet the king in his bedroom, and she gets 12 months of spa treatment. Now, some of you ladies have gone to the spa. I don't know. I could ask for a raise of hands. I'm going to guess almost every woman in here has been to the spa. Anyone never been to the spa? I've never been to the spa. Maybe one or two. Never been to the spa. Anyone ever have, anyone, I know women, like, they do these, like, pedicures and stuff like that. I could never imagine sitting there and letting someone touch my feet and clip my toenails and I don't know. Men, any men here ever get a pedicure? If you did, you're not willing to admit it. I've never done it, and I really don't think it's ever going to happen. I just couldn't. I think it'd be like, you ever see Dumb and Dumber, where he's got the big claws and they're, I don't know. I just wouldn't. I can't do it. I can't do it. But she gets 12 months of spa treatment. She gets oil massaged into her skin over a 6-month period. She gets 6 months of perfume and cosmetics, and so her skin is like silky smooth by the time she meets the king, and she smells good, which in a world that lacks deodorant might mean something. I mean, in our world, you ever meet a person who refuses to wear deodorant? You ever meet a person who is against the concept? You know what I mean? Like, every once in a while you meet someone who's against the concept of deodorant, and I'm not against it. I'm I'm in full favor of deodorant. But every once in a while you'll meet somebody who's against the concept of deodorant. And it will give you just a hint of what the ancient world might have smelled like. Just a hint. I don't get it personally, but whatever, it is what it is. People, there's a whole lot of different people in this world who have a whole lot of different beliefs, and I'm not going to do it, but if you want to do it, that's, whatever. So they rub these oils on her, and they rub these perfumes on her so she smells good. Someone like me, I would have had a real problem. I would have probably died because of the asthma and all that stuff. Like, if ladies put on a lot of perfume, or men put on a lot of cologne, like, I immediately struggle to breathe. Like we have a rule in my house that like if Roxanne's going to wear perfume in church, she's got to wait until after I get out of the car at church to spray it on, because I'll just struggle the whole time. I can't breathe in that stuff. And sometimes you get around a person, it's just like what's the word? Wafts. It just wafts through like the room. But I imagine that Esther, the smell of Esther, which would for most people be a pleasant smell, is wafting through the room, which is better than the alternative, which is a world of no deodorant. But anyway, for an ancient Persian woman, this is a life of luxury and extravagant. Not only is her body prepared for the royal bedroom, but she has to kind of prepare her mind. And verses 13 and 14. The young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything that she desired was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, now pay attention to this. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem, to the custody of Sheazgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. I'm going to explain this in a second. She would not again go in to the king unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. So the women would meet the king in verse 13, and they would bring certain things that might entertain him. For instance, maybe someone would go in with a musical instrument, or maybe someone would go in and recite poetry or something like this. I don't know exactly how it would work, or sing. We don't really know. But what we do know is that she would go in the evening, and in the morning she would leave. So what do you think's going on? And she changes harems when she's done. So she leaves the first harem under the charge of Haggai, and Haggai really likes Esther. You might remember the name from last week. You don't have to remember the name. I think I said last week, it's not on the test. Haggai's name is not on the test. But, she leaves the first harem, and Haggai likes her, and so he basically tells her, we'll see in a second. She leaves the first harem, goes and meets the king in the evening, and then the next morning leaves the king and goes into a second harem under the charge of this guy, Sheazgaz. What do you think's going on? You think they're playing chess? You think they're playing, what's the game where you take the war? Is it war? Where you take you play as like a country or something, and you... Risk? Is it called Risk? I don't know. Risk? And you have to like take over like the whole... You think they're playing Risk? What's the game that Ferris Bueller played in the war games? Was that he made, a game that ended up taking control of the nuclear weapons? Well, it wasn't Ferris Bueller in that movie. He was another, Matthew Broderick, yeah. So whatever it is, it wasn't playing war games. They weren't playing checkers. Or dice. I don't even know how to play. How do you play dice? I don't know how to play dice. Yahtzee. What do you think they were doing? They left one harem. They prepared for a year to meet the king. They left one harem. They met with the king at night, and then the next morning they went into an entirely different harem of concubines. What do you think is happening? It doesn't take rocket science to figure that one out. Now, she becomes a concubine. She enters into essentially, there's a consummation that happens that moves her into being something like a wife. But then once you enter into the second harem as a concubine, so now you've already been with the king, Now you weren't allowed to go into the king again unless the king delighted in you and summons you by name. So now what happens is, it's like now you move into this kind of like you're like a wife. You're something like a wife. You're a concubine. Now some of these kings would really rack up wives and concubines. Can you think of anyone in the Bible who racked up wives and concubines? Solomon had how many? How many wives and concubines combined? About 1,000. He had 1,000 wives. That's one for every day of the year for 3 years. If you add that up, something like that. Imagine having 1,000. Now I can't imagine that Solomon had 1,000 wedding ceremonies. I just don't see it that way. It's hard to imagine that you could even have possibly accomplished that. So I'm not seeing there being anything like, for a lot of these kings who are racking up women and harems, that there are these types of wedding ceremonies. You are part of the harem, you go and you be with the king, and now you are one of his concubines, and you're part of the second harem. The first harem is like preparing to meet the king. The second harem is you've already met the king. You've already been with the king. But those women, why would you want a life like that? I couldn't even imagine. But for some of these women, it's a life of luxury. For some of these women, it's a way to change their status. And some of these women, they wouldn't go into the king again unless he called. Some of them might really like that. I mean, I get to live this life of luxury, and I don't even have to deal with the king's sexual appetite. This is fantastic. Maybe that's how for others, it's like, I want more. I want the power and influence of the throne. I don't know. I don't know what each one, we don't know how many of them there are, and I don't know what each one of them are thinking. But today, it's Esther's turn. Today is Esther's turn. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, when the turn of Esther came to go into the king, she did not request anything except what Hegai, now Hegai was over the first harem of women. So these are the women who are preparing to meet the king and be with him, but they haven't been with him yet. She did not request anything except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So this is a big day. This is a day where Esther now, she is going to be with the king. And this interaction with the king, in her mind, this is going to affect what happens going forward. This is going to affect whether or not she just becomes a number in the midst of numbers, and she just gets forgotten and lives her life of luxury, and every once in a while has to appease the king's sexual appetites, or whether or not she gets some influence. Because remember, it's kind of known at this point that the king is looking to replace his queen. So that's on the table. That's on the table. Now, some people think she isn't married to the king, and they think she's committing adultery, and that may be true. It's hard to know exactly how harems worked. The way I read it, based on its context, it looks like when you're in that first harem, you go, you meet with the king, and you consummate your concubinage with him. So you basically become a concubine, and then you enter into the second harem. That's what's happening here. It's the only way I could read it. Concubine is less than a wife. Sometimes you have them for mere sexual pleasure. Sometimes you have them to sow your seed, so to have more children. So there are concubines for. Can you think of anyone in the Bible who took a concubine in order to have children? What's that? First name that would come to mind, I would almost have to be Abraham, right? So, there were concubines for the purpose of raising children, and maybe some of that was going on here. Maybe it could be for an ancient king. just gathering up women to display his power and his authority. Look at all these women that I have, like trophies. This is not the type of world that we live in. It's not the type of thinking that godly people have. It's not the type of circumstance that a godly person would be like, yeah, I'm cool going into that situation. A godly person would be like, let me get away from this. Let me escape from this. Let me refuse to participate in this and face whatever consequences may come as a result of it. And sometimes, listen, sometimes the right thing to do is not the easiest thing. Sometimes the right thing to do can cost you. It can be really costly. Anyway, it's Esther's turn to go into the king's bed. She doesn't bring anything with her, only what the head eunuch tells her to bring, Haggai. Haggai knows the king. He knows what the king likes. He knows what the king wants. And he also is really, he really likes Esther. So everyone that Esther meets loves her. Maybe one more reason why I'm not so sure she's so godly. Because if all these lost people in Persia love her, I don't know, that's not evidence in and of itself, but I know that lost and worldly people don't love me. Do lost and worldly people love you? I mean, maybe they do. If they do, maybe it's because you have an infectious personality. Or maybe it's because you're a compromiser. I don't know. But lost and worldly people don't always love me. Sometimes I have a hard time relating to lost and worldly people. Sometimes I have a hard time connecting with lost and worldly people. They don't understand me. I don't understand them. We sometimes have some challenges. Sometimes I don't know how to act around lost and worldly people. Does anyone else feel that way? Or am I by myself? Sometimes I feel like I stick out like a sore thumb among lost and worldly people. And I don't know how to behave in certain settings. And it can get me into some trouble. It's with people get annoyed with me or people don't, but everyone who meets Esther loves her. They love her. She's exactly what a Persian man, what a lost pagan Persian man would desire. And so Haggai gives her some advice, solid advice about how to handle this situation. And we have some time markers here, which is interesting. So the 10th month. So the 10th month, this is like January. This is like December or January. And so what I did, I wanted to find out, okay, they're in Susa. What's the weather like in December and January in Susa that time of year? And it's like in the 60s. It's like in the 60s. So it's kind of like going to Florida in the winter. If you've ever gone to Florida, I used to come February, I'd get so sick. I'd get so sick of the winter. I'd be like, we're going to Florida. I gotta get out of this weather. I gotta get out of this snow. I can't stand it. I hate it. And I'd go down, and it'd be like 60 or 70. I'd be like, oh yeah, it's nice to get a little break from the winter. Anyone else ever do that? That's basically what it's like in Susa. And it's the 7th year of the king's reign. At this point, that's the year 479. Now, the reason I said it was the year 480, why did I say the passage started in the year 480 if it's 479? It was a year for preparation. So you have to take that into account. So the passage starts in the year 480, and we've gone through an entire year in these verses to 479. That's what's going on. But anyway, Esther is going to meet the king. She's almost certainly heard about the incident with the former queen. I mean, that's kind of why the office is available right now. She's almost certainly heard about the rebellion that's taken place in the king's court. She doesn't want to blow it the way Vashti blew it. Will the king love her? Will he think she's beautiful? Will she stand out among the other women in the harem? Look at verse 17. The king loved Esther more than all women. And she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And so he loves her more than all the other women. He's immediately smitten by her. He's immediately smitten by the way she looks, or by the way her body looks, or by the way she smells, or how smooth her skin, or whatever humility she might have. I mean, if I'm the king at this point, I'm dealing with a woman. I had dealt with a woman who was maybe like proud and rebellious. I'd probably be looking, and that's what happens. You have an experience where like you see something really bad and then you look for the opposite. So I have to imagine that he's looking for humility. I have to imagine that he's looking for submissiveness. And later in the passage, that does seem to show up. So I think that's a factor. But in his mind, she's just about the perfect woman. And so she finds favor and kindness with him more than all the other virgins. And he sets the royal crown on her head. Esther becomes queen. Now again, we ask the question, is she a willing participant? I can't read the passage and think otherwise. Maybe you do. That's okay. We could still be friends. That's okay. Maybe you say, oh, no, she's not willing. She's stuck into this situation. And you could maybe empathize with her and sympathize with her and say, well, what else is she supposed to do at this point? What is she supposed to do? Like, I get that. I get that you might think that. Did she hate the situation? Did she wish that she could escape? Was she merely resigned to this is what the situation is, there's nothing I could do about it, I have to accept it as a fact of life? Maybe that's possible. Maybe. But man, it's hard to read Esther and come to that conclusion. It's a lot easier to read what we've read and see her as an opportunist. It's a lot easier to read it, and this is an opportunity to change my life. It's like so many modern Western women, would you rather him be rich and a jerk, or would you rather him be poor and really nice? And so many women are like, I think I'll go with the money. I could do a lot of things with that money. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but this is reality. It really is the way Western women, modern women think. You know it, and I know it. There are some good ones who would say, I don't care about the money, I care about the person. But there are a lot of bad ones. They make videos about, what do they call them? The women who want the money? Gold diggers. They make gold digger videos where a guy approaches a woman and he's like, tries to get her number, and she wants nothing to do with him, and then he gets into his rich car. And then she comes back. Oh, I'm sorry. Now she's interested once she sees him get into his rich car. Anyone ever see any of these ridiculous videos? That's the reality of the situation. That's how a lot of women today think. It's really disgusting, but a lot of women are attracted to money and power. Well, Esther sees the situation, and it's hard to think anything other than she's a voluntary participant. It's hard to read it any other way. Maybe I'm too negative. Maybe I have a negative view of ungodly women. But I don't think I do. I think I have a pretty accurate view of ungodly people in general. How do I know that? Because I used to be an ungodly person myself. I wasn't saved until I was 19. And even after I got saved, it took me a while to grow and to figure some stuff out. I can't read the story without seeing sin, compromise, and opportunity. Esther should not be marrying an unbeliever. She should not be hiding her faith or her lineage. She really has no business being part of the royal harem. I see it as sin, pretty clear sin. Does she know it's sin? I don't know for sure. I can't say that. How much of the scripture does she know? I don't know. But the king loves her. He makes her his new queen, and he throws a banquet for her in verse 18. Then the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all princes and his servants. He also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. And so nothing, there's like, hey, we went back, we went to war, and nothing like forgetting that, like getting a new queen and finding the most beautiful one. And maybe she's not the most beautiful one in his mind, I don't know. Maybe it was her humility. Sometimes the way a woman acts changes the way you look at her. You might see a really beautiful woman and she's a loud-mouthed, boisterous woman, and then you just see ugliness. And sometimes you could see like a humble woman and a respectful woman and maybe not as good looking, and she becomes considerably more attractive. I mean, that can happen in life. It happens all the time, I'm sure. To him, Esther is the best. He makes her his queen. He throws a huge party. And she's on top of the world, I imagine, because now she's become one of the most powerful women in the world. She is the queen in the most, maybe not the most powerful empire in the world because they lost to Greece, but to Greece. But the most powerful empire in the region, for sure. I mean, they cover basically the whole area all the way going over to Greece and all the way over into India. They're covering the entire ancient Near East at this point. And yet, even though she is the most powerful woman in that region of the world, which is a huge area, she continues to keep her faith and her lineage a secret. When the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. So not only does Esther have influence, but Mordecai is having influence with Esther. Remember, he's like a father to her. And so she listens to what he says. That's pretty serious influence, especially if you've had any children and you give them advice, and they don't always listen to everything you say. But Esther listens to what Mordecai says, so there's some influence there. But he has influenced her to keep her lineage a secret. And that means keeping her faith a secret. And that means that these people won't hear about the Lord. That means that these people won't hear about the one true God. And that is, again, one of the big pieces of evidence that convinces me that she's not a godly person. Everything I've read is ungodliness. Everything I've read is like she's no different than the pagan world around her. That's what I'm seeing so far. Where Esther and Mordecai have a great opportunity to tell people about the Lord. They're now in a position of influence. It's like sometimes these athletes, they get in these positions of influence and then they open their mouths. And it's like, I just want to watch you play football. I don't care what you think about global warming or global cooling. It's now called climate change because they don't know whether the world's warming or cooling. So they call it climate change. We're getting 0.6 inches further away from the sun every year. And therefore we can do something about it and change it. I can't imagine that we can change the fact that we're now 0.6 inches further away from the sun than we were last year. I can't change that. I don't think I can change that. But these people who think they can change it fly around in their private jets and spend more fuel in a few hours than I do in an entire year. But they're the ones preaching all the climate change. I don't care what LeBron James thinks about politics or Steph Curry or whoever. I don't care. Just play football or baseball and shut your mouth. But sometimes these people, they think they have all this ability to spread their message. And they'll put on their football helmets, love wins. And they'll put on their football helmets, what's one of the other messages we see on the helmets? They drive me crazy. I can't think of, but I see them and I immediately want to start rooting against that team. because I'm like, just get the stupid message off your helmet. It doesn't belong there. But Esther's she's in an opportunity where she's now in a position of influence where she can start witnessing within the palace. She can start making a change with the king. I realize that's a little different than what I'm saying about these football players, but she has an opportunity to tell people about the Lord, and instead she takes the opportunity to advance in society. She could have told the king about her God. She could have told him what God says. She could have told him, I can't marry an unbeliever. That might not have turned out so well for her. She might have died. The king might have been upset with her. She might have been exiled. Who knows? He might not have become so enamored with her. Almost certainly would not have chosen her to be his queen. Can you imagine? I mean, even after she became queen, she could have told them. She could have said, hey, I'm a Jew. You realize how this story would have changed? If the king knew that his queen was a Jew, can you realize how the story would have changed when Haman later on tries to wipe out the entire people? If the king knew that entire people is my wife's people? She says nothing. Immature, ungodly, compromising people. I see Esther as a woman who enters a sinful relationship with an unbelieving king. Does she have a beautiful face and a beautiful body? Scripture says she does. Does she have spiritual maturity? Not from what I can see. And yet, God uses her, even though she's sinful, even though she makes compromises. God doesn't work in the situation because she made bad choices. God works in the situation in spite of her bad choices. But God still uses her. God is allowing the scene to be set for Esther to do something for him. Has she failed? Yes. Will she eventually? Should we judge her harshly? That's to be debated. But what I see is that God will use even these weak, at the moment, weak and compromising people. God will use them. And when I see that in every chapter in Esther, it helps me understand the truth that God can and will use us even when we have done sinful things, if we allow him to. God can and will use us even when we've made foolish decisions. He can and will use us even after we've done wrong. Even sometimes the sinful decisions that we make put us in a situation where God can work. That can happen. God's not working because of it, but God's working in spite of it. And so you need to be mindful of what God says. You need to be ready to be used by God, even if you have up to this point compromised or lived in sin, or in some ways even maybe even damaged your testimony, or even if at the moment you're just not a spiritual giant, you're just spiritually weak, God can still use you. The situation can change. God can and will use you if you allow him to. It often means changing your perspective. It often means changing your thinking. It often means a certain level of repentance. I need to be open to what God says in his word. It's hard for God to use you if you set yourself against him. Anyway, let's take our hymnals and turn to, let's see here, 387 is it? 387. If you're not sure that you're saved, then you be sure to talk to us and we'll explain the gospel to you more clearly. If you're sure you're saved and you look at your life and you say, there's a lot about Esther's life that my life looks like. There's a lot of compromise that I've made. There's a lot of sin. I've started to walk down a path that isn't exactly what God would want of me. Then you can change things right now. You can turn. You can repent right now. You can get right with God. Stand and sing 387.